Welcome one and all to the first ever CLC debate night. The fight is between Vogon Waite and Eric Goldberg, and the topic is gun control. The kind of tone of this debate isn't going to be it's not going to be super comparable to presidential debates and stuff. It's going to be a little bit more just discussion, and as moderator, I'm mostly here to just make sure that each person gets to have a say and that there aren't too many crowd interruptions or anything like that. Hopefully, if you're listening, you'll be relatively kind and maybe mute yourself or, just try and keep it down low. If anybody's too disrupting, I'll mute you. And then at the end, towards the end, we'll probably take maybe some topic ideas or questions from listeners. But for the time being, I think we're going to just try and keep it to a discussion. And what I'm going to do is, I think if you guys are okay with this, I'm going to have AtlasBot flip a coin, and then that'll determine who gets to go first. What do you think?
Okay, yeah, that's fine with me.
I don't even know what AtlasBot is, but yeah, let's do it.
Okay, it'll be in the general chat. All right, I'm flipping the coin now. Let's see. Somebody call it. We'll make it a neutral party. Chris, tell me who gets heads or tails.
Lemon Wedges has a head on his avatar, so he'll be heads.
Okay. So if we land heads, Lemon Wedges Vogon goes first. All right, we got heads. So you've got the floor, Vogon.
Okay. Well, that kind of works out. I was just going to ask a basic question for Eric anyway. I guess I was to kind of set the tone so I can see where we both stand, and obviously you can ask me after I ask you. I was kind of wondering, what is your sort of general philosophy on the presence and role of firearms in the United States in general? Why do you hold that position, and what kind of legislation do you think should be enacted?
So sorry, there's something weird with my headphones right now. Trying to avoid your question. No, so it's weird because for a long time I didn't really hold a strong opinion about guns. I think it wasn't really until Sandy Hook that we saw nothing happen that I really began wait, we do need to do something. I don't know what it is, but we do need to do it. I think guns have become a part of our culture, but at the same time, I think it's a very recent development. In our almost 300-year history, I think it's more towards the 1970s where guns become a very political issue. Even Warren Burger, who was a conservative Supreme Court justice, was very talking about how the NRA kind of marketed guns to the point where it completely disregards the initial intention of the Second Amendment. So I don't know the solution for guns. I'm not one of those people saying, let's repeal the Second Amendment, because that's just impractical, and I think that would cause the Second Civil War. But at the same time, I don't think doing nothing, which we have been doing, is helping us. Because we have a problem in this country. We are the only first world country that has these problems. And to say that we can't do anything about it is just a defeatist attitude. After someone had a shoe bomb, we now have to take off our shoes to go on an airplane. And after 20 kids get murdered, nothing changed. So why aren't we doing anything about it? It's because of pressure from an organization, the NRA, which has a lot of members, but those members don't necessarily agree to the extent that the NRA wants to. The NRA's main goal of guns, they want an absolute rule, where I don't think that's the proper way to go.
So, Eric, even though you don't necessarily have a solution, have there been any solutions out there that have piqued your interest that you think could potentially work, even if you're not sure?
It's tough. I think we do have to let the CDC fund gun research. By law, no funding by the government is allowed to go to the CDC to look into research. Obama tried to go around that loophole, and the conclusion was basically, well, we don't really have the resources to have enough information for that to come up with a proper conclusion. So I think that's the first step. I do want to say look at Australia as an example, but I think that's an extreme route, which we, clearly can't go down. But I don't have a solution, and I think saying that since I don't have a solution, then, there is no solution, that's stupid because I don't have the resources. But to say, since I don't have a solution, then let's continue with the same laws is also stupid.
Okay. That's interesting. Well, for my part, I'm not, I think we both agree that there is a gun violence problem. I think my main issue with the way it's portrayed a lot of times is how severe it is and how it can be remedied. Sort of my main issues is the way the media and Democrats in particular portray one very specific type of guns as the issue, when if you look at the data, it's very patently obvious that quote-unquote assault weapons are not the main issue in gun violence, and the legislation that they propose, primarily things like assault weapons bans, will not only be ineffective in the purpose that they are ostensibly recommended to fix, but they won't even solve the minor problems of what they say that assault weapons cause. So, for example, if you look up the FBI statistics, assault weapons never account for more than like 400 total deaths in a year, whereas the total number of gun homicides is around 11,000 at the maximum, and almost 80% of those are committed with handguns. So when Democrats come out and they say, oh, see, look at this issue, if you would just let us pass assault weapons bans, this could all be fixed, I become very skeptical of their intentions in this debate.
No, and I realize that most gun deaths are suicide, but I don't think that statistic should be swept under the rug, because I think guns make suicide a lot more easier than, because like slitting your wrist or trying to hang yourself is really only like 6 to 7% effective. Like killing yourself with a gun, that's a lot more effective.
I would question the effectiveness of hanging, because I actually was reading about statistics in the UK, where the UK is one of those places where people like to point to as having good gun control laws, and their primary choice of suicide is hanging, as a matter of fact, and specifically white males choose to hang themselves because it's so effective.
No, actually, according to the BMJ journals, which maybe since that's not a very well-known organization, this is not going to be that too much of a winner. But it's cuts or poisoning are only fatal 6 to 7% of the time. I'm not sure about hangings though, so you're correct about that. But in Australia, when they did the gun buyback program, suicides decreased by 74%.
Yeah, but suicides and pretty much all violent crime, both gun crime and non-gun related crime, was already falling before the gun buyback.
I don't know but when Israeli Defense Force stopped letting soldiers bring their guns home over the weekend, suicides also fell by 40%. Like, again, causation and
correlation.
Correlation. They're like,
correlation does not equate to causation. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, but so you don't like have the absolute research to back all those stats up. But at the same time, like, you kind of see a trend there that you can't ignore.
Yeah. Here's one of my issues. I don't think that bringing up suicide by gun is an invalid complaint. But one of my issues with it is the way they conflate suicide by gun with homicide by gun in an effort to push forward assault weapons bans specifically. That's kind of my issue. It's because all gun-related issues are sort of thrown together into these these quick gotcha facts, like the 30,000 people die from gun violence every year sort of quotes that some people hear from places like CNN or MSNBC, without knowing that, though obviously you know this, but a lot of people don't know that some 60 to 70% of that 30,000 is suicides. But they use that sort of lump sum of 30,000 to justify assault weapons bans on semi-automatic rifles, except that they're not actually tackling the semi-automatic issue and sort of just banning aesthetic features of a semi-automatic rifle, which in itself is not going to solve any issues. And on top of that, even if in a hypothetical scenario where you banned all semi-automatic rifles and sort of, like, I know a common talk point is, oh, the Second Amendment was made with muskets in mind, flintlock pistols and stuff like that. I can guarantee you a 50 caliber lead ball from a flintlock pistol can put a massive hole in your head. So that's not...
Yeah, but that's
so
one shot.
Weapons,
it's not necessarily about that, but that's one shot, and then you have to reload. I mean,
but see how...
I think that's... But the thing is, like, I think that's the problem, like, when we're debating against assault weapons, yeah, they might not be the cause for most of the deaths, but they are predominantly used in mass shootings more so than, you know, a handgun. I mean, when you're talking about Sandy Hook, you know, that was with an assault weapon. When you're talking about, the past few shootings, I mean, the last one had to do with a shotgun. So yeah, I mean, that's the rule. That's the exception to the rule.
It's actually not. I was actually checked out a Washington Post article where they were sort of outlining the history of mass shootings in the United States all the way back to like 79 or so. And they kind of started with sort of the first big mass shooting that kind of started off this trend that we see through modern times. Was it was in Texas, and it was a Texas school shooting, I believe. He was in a watchtower, and he had a bolt-action rifle of some kind, and he basically sniped civilians as he saw them. And from then up to now, actually the majority of mass shootings are committed with 9mm handguns.
I think you're talking about Kent State. Yeah, and mass shootings are. Mass shootings are. I think 4 people are murder. I think that's the.
According to the FBI, it's 4 people injured, not including the shooter himself. Yeah.
And I think
I'm gonna jump in here real quick. I've written this down so that we can come back to it. We won't lose our place. But I think before we go on, we've kind of gotten Eric's side of the fact that he doesn't really know that there is what the solution would be, but he thinks that we should do something. We didn't really get Vaughn's opinion on that. So as far as the attacks and things, how do you feel?
For my part, I kind of feel that specifically on gun control, I don't think there is any more that can or should be done at this point as related directly to guns or the types of guns that we have. I think in a lot of ways the U.S. government has already overstepped its boundaries in its regulations against the Second Amendment.
But how?
Well, one thing that stands out specifically to me is, I don't remember the exact year, but there's a legislation in 1980s, I want to say maybe 84 or so, that bans the sale of any automatic weaponry made after 1984 to civilians. And frankly, I think that's completely arbitrary and totally absurd. Why can I buy an M16 if I jump through all of the legal hoops to qualify for that M16 that is fully automatic, that was made before 1984, whenever that legislation was introduced, but I can't buy an automatic rifle that was made after them? It's completely arbitrary and totally goes against the intention of the Second Amendment, in my opinion. And I don't think that it will hold up as the years go on and more weaponry is introduced into the common knowledge.
Okay, so that's a good point, right? I mean, not point, but that's a good jumping off point. So you're talking about the intentions of the Second Amendment, and I think that's something very important because I do not believe that we as a society today are interpreting the intentions of the Second Amendment as our founding fathers did. Now,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I would like to sort of explain what I think could be done to reduce gun violence before we jump into the Second
Okay.
Amendment
Yeah,
issue, because
that's
that's such, like a whole other facet of the
Yeah,
conversation.
that's fine.
So jumping back to what I think can be done, I think we should look into legislation that addresses issues besides the guns that are available to the U.S. populace. So I think one thing that I don't think you will have any issue with, I think that basically all drugs should be legalized. I think that's unnecessarily draconian. Like, if people want to do drugs, let them do drugs. Banning drugs only. banning all these drugs, like especially super mundane stuff like marijuana and stuff like that, is only producing black markets that where people fight over a drug selling territory and further increasing gun crime. I also think that we should take, I know it's kind of a buzzword from the NRA, some people might say, but I think we should take a hard look at mental health. Lots of people. That's another whole facet.
Okay, let me jump in about the mental health issue. People who commit, first of all, mental health is, yes, it is the main argument that gun owner that the NRA jumps to, which is kind of tough because one of Trump's first things he signed into law was actually to rebuff an Obama executive order, which made it difficult for, I think, 75,000 people with mental health issues to buy a gun, and it was overturned, but yet they keep jumping to, well, it's mental health. But let's be clear on something. Mental health is actually the very small percentage of people who commit the crimes have mental health issues. Like, very small. If it might even not even be double digits. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's very small. So I think that's, I think a lot of gun violence is just caused by someone having a bad day.
That's an interesting point. I haven't seen anything about that. Well, first off, let me comment on Trump's executive orders sort of overturning Obama's executive orders. The reason he did that was because it was drawing in a bunch of unintended victims, quote unquote, of that legislation, mainly old people who request assistance doing lots of math work on to apply for Social Security and stuff like that. And not only, it wasn't just Trump who overturned this, it was, I want to say the ADL. There was some other civil rights activist group who actually agreed with Trump on overturning this executive order.
It's the ACLU.
ACLU, that's correct.
Yeah, no.
Because it was too broad.
I will say this, ACLU is the most non-hypocritical organization there is. Like, they will defend everything that's First Amendment related, regardless of how abhorrent it is. And that's to their, praise. Yeah.
So, I mean, the reason why that executive order was overturned is because it was too broad and in its coverage. So I don't think you can hold that against Trump. You have to hold it against Obama for passing through laws without debate from Congress to get that shit lined up so that it didn't have to be overturned by the next president.
Yeah, so it's 3 to 5% of violent acts are attributable to mental illness, according to a Duke study, and most do not involve guns. So that's kind of like the mental health debate. Like, that's not going to solve mental health problems. And if you're talking about the broadness of Obama's legislation, how do you narrow in? Like, what do you look at? Do you just tell everyone with schizophrenia not to have guns, or bipolar disorder? Like, I suffer from depression. Should I not be allowed to have a gun?
I don't think you should be banned from having a gun, no. That's one of those issues that would have to be debated in Congress as opposed to being unilaterally legislated through executive order.
So in regards to what I think should be done about guns, I know my thing was, I don't know. I do think there is a few steps we can take, and you're gonna completely disagree with this, but I do think we should get rid of, they call it the gun show loophole. I think that's a little misleading because it's just a private seller loophole.
Yeah. And it's not a loophole. It was deliberately made that way.
Well, yeah. So no, but the thing is, it's like, I don't see how, okay, we can argue about background checks, but then that way to buy a gun is not, that's fine. I can just go to someone online I meet online and say, can I buy a gun? And I don't have to go through any background checks. So it just completely defeats the purpose of the background check. Now, I understand that only represents a small portion of gun ownerships, but I think and you're probably going to see this as a very authoritarian
I think it's
solution.
probably a fairly large amount, actually. I bought my first gun through a private sale.
Oh. See, I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt there. You're probably going to see this as very authoritarian, but I think guns kind of, and it might be too late to do this considering the amount of guns out there right now, but I do think guns should be kind of treated as a car. Like, you have a title, if you buy a car from someone, you have to transfer that title over, and then now there's this database. And the thing is, the NRA has made it almost impossible for the FBI to actually have a database. There is a law that says that there's no, if you find a gun at the scene of a crime, if the FBI finds a gun at the scene of the crime, there's no digital database for them to look it up, who that gun belongs to. There's this massive storage facility with loads and loads of boxes, and it takes days, months, weeks to go through it. And that's and
that's a bit. I've heard of that. There is a database of sorts. I need to do a little more research, but I know what you're talking about. But typically, they can pull up gun sales records within a couple days, and if it's like a real rush issue, they can pull it up within the same day. So they're not totally hamstrung. I have my issues with the gun registry. The primary reason is because, well, first of all, there's sort of two issues. One is a gun registry. There's sort of like what many people assume is sort of a tinfoil hat theory, that if there's a gun registry that is constantly maintained and every person who owns a gun is required to constantly file with the federal government where exactly that gun is and who owns it at every moment, that in the instance where possibly the government decides that, okay, the U.S. populace can't have guns anymore, they can use that registry and go confiscate guns. That's obviously sort of the tinfoil hat theory what may be considered a tinfoil hat theory. That's one of the reasons why people argue against it. Second of all, is the issue of enforcement. So, for example, this applies to both the National Gun Registry and universal background checks, which I know is a pet issue for Democrats. How would you enforce that? I know a National Gun Registry and universal background checks are sort of both pet issues for Democrats, and the issue of enforcement, practical, real-world enforcement of those laws, is another reason why those things are argued against. How exactly will you enforce something like universal background checks if people like me, where currently I live an hour away from the nearest grocery store, how exactly are you going to prevent me from giving my neighbor a couple $100 for his AR-15? Like, how could you reasonably expect the U.S. government to regulate that?
I don't have the answer for that. I'm not saying there's not an answer for it. I just personally don't know the logistics involved. I mean, there's people shockingly who are a lot smarter than me who might be able to figure out the logistics. But
so let me talk about another issue. Oh yeah, go ahead,
Vaughn. Real quick, could you make that same argument for the cars and how cars all have titles, and you could just give your car to a buddy and he could be driving around with a car that's not his?
Oh yeah,
wouldn't it be the same thing?
Yeah, and I mean it is the same thing. I mean, there's people driving around without insurance and without the liens on their cars all the time. It's like a huge issue. And I mean, I hear the car argument a lot of times where people say cars should be regulated, or rather, guns should be regulated like cars are. And I kind of find that ironic because if you look into it a little deeper, they're actually regulated fairly similarly. You don't actually need a license or a registration to own and operate a vehicle on your personal property. And that's kind of analogous to guns, where, with the exception of open carry, and if you would like to argue against open carry, that's fine, But with guns, you're generally speaking not allowed to carry a gun around for the purposes of defense in public areas. So I find that the argument against comparing cars and guns kind of ironic because it sort of actually leans in the favor of gun legislation or gun proponents, I think. In my opinion, anyway.
Eric, can you clarify something for me real quick? You made a statement that said something to the effect of that oftentimes gun violence isn't related to mental health, that it's often could be somebody just having a bad day.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's possible for somebody to have a bad day and let that turn into gun violence without them having a mental disorder? Whether it be officially declared by a doctor or not.
And where do you think the term "going postal" comes from? It's
yeah. I would concede that there are things called crimes of passion, where somebody just gets super angry about something that happened and they happen to have a gun on them. I mean, that's a pretty common issue actually in domestic disputes. Is a dude has a gun and he'll come home and see his wife cheating on him or something and whip out a gun and shoot two people.
Yeah, I mean, I
don't think it's an unfair characterization of an instance. I don't think it's very nearly the most common instance of gun violence, but it is a possibility, certainly.
Like, when you hear these news stories, you're hearing, and you're hearing, like, interviews from the neighbors and stuff, like, oh, he was such a nice man, he was such a, oh, I would never expect that out of him. I mean, that's kind of the majority of the violent news stories I hear watching the local news.
Mm-hmm.
So you are kind of, yeah, I think everyone has mental health problems, whether it's diagnosed or not. And I think the whole mental health debate is just, you're kicking the can down the road. It's a petty argument. I'm sorry. It's, of course, and I think people like to use that excuse because they're kind of like, oh, I just don't believe that anyone could kill 20 people, so he must be crazy.
Well, I think it's an important aspect because a lot of these mass shooters, like the ones who show up at the schools, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them are taking some kind of antidepressant pills of some kind, or I forget what the medical
Adderall
those pills are.
I mean, that was,
not necessarily
no, but that was
but,
that was the same excuse used by the Texas not governor, the lieutenant governor. It was like, oh, just kids are relying too much on Adderall, or there are too many doors in the school. Like, it's. I'm
not using this as an excuse, but for example, obviously suicide is a major issue in the total amount of gun deaths that accrue through the year in the United States. Obviously, depression is a mental health issue, and if we sort of eliminate the stigma of somebody going to get their depression looked at, going to psychologists and stuff like that, and also making it easier, one of the big issues in contributing to gun violence, quote-unquote gun violence, which is primarily suicide, especially in very rural areas like myself, where I live, is that they don't have access to psychologists and stuff to assist them with their depression. So eventually they're all by themselves with their thoughts.
Universal health for all.
maybe that's a possibility. I'm not necessarily 100% opposed to that.
But the thing is, like, when the arguments come of, like, when there's a shooting, it's everything that's the problem but guns. And I think that's the point that infuriates me. It's like the lieutenant governor of Texas is like, it's a violent video game. There's too many doors in the school.
I will acknowledge to you that I don't think that guns are unrelated. Okay, I will give you that. I don't think guns are unrelated to the issue of gun violence. Obviously, in a hypothetical scenario where there are exactly 0 guns in the U.S., I would not contest that there would be almost 0 gun violence. But my contention is, well, first of all, we have like half of all the guns in the world in the United States, over 300 million. There's no way you will be able to get rid of all those guns. And second of all, I have to contest whether the sacrifice of civil liberties is worth the tiny amount of lives saved, ultimately, statistically, the tiny amount of lives saved for the sacrifice of those freedoms.
No, but then you also have to weigh, okay, the amounts of lives saved versus the amounts of lives killed. Like, so there's the thing is, like, what I was saying before is there is no research, government funded research by law for obvious reasons because of the NRA
I would contest
lobbyists
that there is
that allows
that it is illegal
CDC
for
funding.
research to be.
What?
I don't think it's illegal for the CDC to research gun violence.
No, you're right.
least
It's
not
not.
anymore.
It's not legal because of lobbying efforts by the NRA.
No, I think it is legal. They just
No, it's
choose not to
you're
use it.
not allowed government funding into research.
Maybe at one point. I
No,
think
it is
legislation passed over.
that is the law. This is not an opinion. This is the law. I promise you on that. You're not the CDC
Okay.
is not allowed to get funding for guns. Now, that is by design. Is it because they're afraid of what they might find? There's And so then, but going back to the point, you have to weigh, like, yeah, a lot of people will give stories about how a gun saved their life. And they could. Probably a lot of times they are. But then there's also different interpretations. Like, oh, I was walking down an alley and I saw this nasty creature. And if I didn't have flash my gun, he would have raped me. Like, we don't know. We don't know. That's one person's story of how a gun saved their life. Probably very inflated story as well.
I mean, pretty much all national surveys agree that at least 500,000 times somebody uses a gun for self-defense.
No, but
And you're correct. It's not necessarily, they don't necessarily pull out their gun and shoot and kill somebody, but I think that would be counterproductive to the purpose of saving lives if you mandated that is the standard that somebody must meet to
but the thing is, it's also an inflated story too. It's like, have you ever told your friends about, how you were drunk last weekend and it was so crazy, there were so many hookers there and there was a midget that came and it was crazy, but then that's your story, but in reality it didn't really happen like that. There might have been, instead of a lot of strippers, there might have been like one girl who was dressing slutty. Like,
possibly, but I would also contest that there are also a numerous amount of people who would say that when polled, that they did not use their gun defensively because they don't know whether or not they did so legally.
Well, and those are the people and that's like, when you're talking about things like stand your ground rule, it's basically it's one person's defense versus the other. Now, I know George Zimmerman didn't get off with a stand your ground rule, but for the point of my argument, he did, because I personally don't see the difference between him quote unquote defending himself and the stand your gun rule. I mean, if you want to explain to me, I'd be more than happy to listen, because
I'm not 100%, but effective. Basically, stand your ground law dictates that you do not have a requirement to retreat. So what that means is that if you perceive a threat from somebody, even before they actually lay hands or arms on you, you can shoot them. Especially if they're in your house. That's where castle doctrine comes into effect. Zimmerman's case was not that at all. Zimmerman's case was he was having his head bashed against the concrete of the sidewalk, and he pulled out his firearm and killed the person who was doing that to him.
So just out of curiosity, though, is Trayvon Martin, since apparently George Zimmerman was following him, would he have had the same defense? Like, if he had a gun, if he actually did have a gun on him, would he have, been allowed to shoot?
That depends from state to state. I have no idea. I do not recall. Do you happen to know what state they were in at the time?
Florida.
I don't know what Florida state laws are regarding standing ground in public spaces.
Okay, so, but that's a few points I have, though. One is, when someone claims defense, they are now the judge, jury, and executioner. There's no, yes, the police can do the report, but chances are, if they said, well, I felt threatened, you're going to get off. That's unnerving to me. That doesn't make...
Depending where you live, that's not always the case.
It's not always the case, but in a lot of gun touting states, that's the case. So that's kind of very, like, I don't get how that civil right of you owning a gun trumps, no pun intended, someone who doesn't feel safe with someone else having a gun. Like, I don't know if, like, say I see someone carrying a gun, I don't know if they're crazy or not. Maybe I think maybe I think they're going to shoot up.
Unless they're presenting a threat to you, I don't see how that's infringing on your rights.
Trust me, threat is is interpretation.
That's true. There are degrees of what constitutes a threat under law.
Yeah,
but I think in most instances, technically, people, unless somebody's standing around with a gun on their hip, not even looking at you, I think most people would agree that, okay, that person is not threatening you.
But you're right. No, I mean,
that's
right, but that's.
I mean, how do you feel when, like, I mean, it's been a meme in the group this whole time, that woman calling the cops on all those black people just standing around. That's absurd, right?
Yeah, no,
like, you can't assume that somebody just standing around, whether or not they have a knife or a gun or a bat in their hand, you can't just assume that that person is a threat just because they're standing around with that item.
No, but in the case of, like, the George Zimmerman incident, like, the worst thing that would happen was George Zimmerman would just get his ass kicked. Like, is
that the worst that would happen?
I mean, does someone being shot necessarily justify them being shot?
If you had somebody standing over you, grabbing your head and slamming it into the ground repeatedly, would you do nothing under the assumption, oh, well, he's probably going to stop before I die?
I mean, I would try to fight back, but exactly. I wouldn't brandish a gun. I mean, that's not...
But you would, even if you had a gun on you?
Probably not. I mean, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't have a gun on me.
But you would fight back with everything that you had available at the time.
No, but it's like the Jim Jeffries joke. Like, you know, someone, like, you're shooting someone who comes into your house because they're probably just getting a TV. I mean, that's...
Because they're probably just getting a TV?
Like, stealing a TV.
Probably.
Like, the thing is like,
maybe.
Yeah, that...
Possibly. It could be.
Okay, it could be, but, like, do you shoot first and ask questions later, or do you... Like, I don't know, and I don't have the solution for it, but to me, the gun debate is made up of two things. It's made up of hypothetical situations and
like all of yours that you just said just now?
No, yeah, absolutely. Hypothetical situations and anecdotes. Like, oh, there was a one time where someone would say, like, okay, good for you. Like, I'm glad you were able to defend yourself at that time. I just don't think that your one incident, which I'm glad you're alive for, justifies the thousands and thousands of gun deaths we have a year.
Even if the total number of defensive uses outnumbers the number of gun deaths?
Because I don't know if those defensive uses are justifiable. Like, I just don't see, like, you know, someone...
You don't think an instance where somebody even just shows a gun and the entire conflict ends right there without any harm on either party is justifiable?
Well, I just don't know how true those stories are. I mean, I just, like, justifiable at the time. Yes, absolutely. You're, like, saying, like, because this one incident saved someone's life, now I should let all the other incidences go.
Well, I mean, let's think about this. The most conservative estimate of defensive gun use in the U.S. is 500,000 defensive gun uses per year. That's me giving you a bone, because the highest estimate is like upwards of 1 million or several million.
But again, I'm listening to people who are probably, you know, kind of changing their story a little, not purposefully. Maybe they're just more heightened.
I mean, even if it was just, I heard something scare in my backyard, I showed my gun, that scary thing went away.
I'm
gonna step in
here. I'm gonna change the topic on this one because I feel there's a bit of a circle going on here. I wanna jump back to before I asked for Vogon's opinion on where guns go. We were talking about the rate of fire and the power of guns, and the Second Amendment referring to flints. and also mass shootings and the definition therein. Did you guys have more to say on that at all?
So I'm not gonna make the argument about flints. I mean, about the gun, like the technology of guns, even though I think that's a pretty big point to make. But I think we do have to talk about why the Second Amendment was written, and I think you and I can agree that the Second Amendment is very much focused not on the individual right, but the right for a militia, because the way the United States was. If you read both the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers, the one thing they both agree upon is that the United States should not have a central army, but should be made up of militias. Now, we've completely failed at that as a country, obviously, because we have the biggest military around. But
so even if I grant you that argument, is your reasoning that since we failed to apply the law as it was intended by the founders, that we should just throw the rest of it away because we failed to meet the standard that was outlined originally?
No, but I think it's stupid to assume that an American should have the right to own every single weapon.
Nobody argues that.
No, I mean, but where do you draw the line? Like and look, I don't want to be called out because I got the amount of bullets that a gun's able to fire wrong. Like, I'm not trying to play semantics here, but if you're talking about, an AR-15, how many bullets a second does that shoot?
About 300. That's at the
maximum.
A lot. That's
a lot.
Not really. Not really.
How is 300 in 6 minutes? The shooter at
that's assuming that you can pull your trigger finger at a consistent rate. That's the upwards of the human potential for pulling a trigger finger at a consistent rate.
Okay, but in 6 minutes, the shooter at Parkland was able to kill, what's the amount? 25 people?
I don't think it was at Parkland?
Parkland, 20. Sorry. I'm sorry.
It was 15.
15. Okay, sorry. My bad. In 6 minutes, the shooter was able to kill 15 people and then injure a shit ton more. Like, you cannot take something like that. Like, that's one guy. You can't take something like that and just brush it off, saying like, those liberals don't know what they're talking about. I mean, they're saying they want automatic weapons banned, but they don't understand that handguns are automatic weapons. I mean, that's the argument.
Eric, do you have an opinion on how or where to draw the line?
I don't. Like, I mean, like, I want there to be magazine limits, which is probably a non-starter for you.
What do you think is an appropriate magazine size?
I'm not educated enough to make that guess, but
I'll tell you that an AR-15 typically is loaded with 30-round magazines.
Okay, but take James Shaw. Do you know who James Shaw is?
It's not familiar to me now.
James Shaw was the guy who tackled the gunman at the Waffle House after he killed 4 people. Mm-hmm. You know why he was able to tackle him?
Because the guy's gun jammed as he was standing outside the door. Yeah,
it was changing his magazine. That's when he saw his opportunity to go.
Vaughn, do you have an opinion on how or where to draw the line?
On what specifically?
Whatever technology allows.
The power of a weapon or the rate of fire or anything like that.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you.
Ownership.
Real quick, the fact that guy was able to stop the dude in the Waffle House was a very convenient and fortunate coincidence for him. As far as I heard, that the dude's gun jammed as he was fiddling with his gun trying to get it to work again. The student at Parkland, last I heard, was his AR-15 was armed with 10-round magazines, and he was still able to do what he did. As we heard, in Texas, the kid was armed with a shotgun and a .38 revolver, which is on the lower end of the power scale as far as guns go, and he was still able to rack up a 10-kill body count. In Virginia Tech, the student there was armed with a Glock 9mm handgun, which typically loads maybe 15 rounds at maximum, and a Walther 22, which is the absolute smallest bullet they can possibly load. I really don't think that magazine limits is going to solve your problem. But as far as limits for me...
See, I think what you think I'm trying to say is I want to make sure this never happens again, which obviously you and I want. But what I'm really trying to say is, why don't we reduce the damage that can be inflicted. Like that.
So that's where the line topic comes again. So Vaughn, you said as far as limits for me, where were you going to go with that?
Well, as far as limits for me, because I fundamentally believe that the Second Amendment does, in fact, have a place in society and always will. I think that civilians of the United States, at least, because we have a Second Amendment, I think that we should be allowed to, through a varying degree of government background checks, we should be able to obtain any type of infantry firearm that is currently being used and delivered out to U.S. infantry, up to and including automatic weapons, which, by the way, is technically the standard now.
Like I've said in the beginning, like I don't have the answer, obviously. I don't think you have the answer. I don't think anyone does. I just kind of wish that, we're able to have an open dialogue, which I think we are doing right now. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem is both sides. My problem with the gun debate, and you probably think the same thing about my side too, but it's made up of, it's jumping to those stupid arguments. Oh, it's a mental health problem. Oh, it's a video game problem. The only person who can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I think the past few shootings have shown that you don't need a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. It's actually
who stops most
apparently I can't confirm this, so I don't really want to make too much of a broad claim, but apparently during the Parkland shooting, the Santa Fe shooting, there was there were officers security in guards. The building, and there was a and someone got shot by one of the officers, and it wasn't a casualty, but I mean, I think
does when that mean you're never going to call the cops again?
No, but I'm not saying don't call the cops again, but I think when you're in a confined space, having another gun is not necessarily the best solution.
You don't think the cops should have guns then?
I'm not saying that. I just don't like how many guns, like, I don't have the...
So you're saying...
That's fair point. Because, like, this is one thing I was confused about. I kind of understand the annoyance you may have with the claim that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. But the fact of the matter is, you always call the cops to stop the bad guy, and all cops, at least in the U.S., are armed with guns.
Yeah, no, but take Jason Seaman, for example. Do you know who that is?
No.
He recently, in the past week, I think, he's a gym teacher who saved kids with a basketball.
Okay.
No, there was a shooting, and one person was shot, thankfully not killed, but he was able to stop the shooter by throwing a basketball at him.
What do you think he would have been able to do if he had a gun?
I don't know, but I don't think necessarily. I don't think. First of all,
you're bringing up these sort of fringe situations where somebody happened to be in the very right specific circumstances where they were able to stop somebody without the use of a gun. But I don't think you would contend that they would have been able to do the same thing even more effectively if they did have a gun.
But the thing is, it's like even with people having guns in that building, still there would still be casualties. Like how, like is a gym teacher supposed to be carrying a gun with him the entire time? Like, it's not. What'd you say? Why not?
Yeah, I mean,
have you ever tried working out with a gun?
Concealed carry. I own several guns.
No, but do you work out? Like, do you keep a gun in your gym shorts?
Do gym teachers work out? I mean, whenever I was at school, the gym teachers never played with us. They just stood around and told us what to do.
Okay, I'm jumping in here again. I want to talk about, let's see, do you guys have any opinions on punishments for people who leave their guns available or unlocked so that kids can get access to them?
That's an interesting point.
So some kid shoots up a school because he was able to get his father's gun because it was just hanging out. Do you think there should be a punishment for the father?
I mean, my obvious no-brainer answer, when I say no-brainer, I mean like from my side, is like, of course.
The instinctive answer is probably yes.
But I have to wonder
actually what other standards are, though. Like, for example, if a kid steals their dad's car and runs somebody over and kills them, is the person who actually owns the car held liable for that? I don't know. I'm asking a question.
If it's stolen, no. But
Well,
again, but I don't see. This is tough because like I kind of see the dilemma, and I do see both sides. I think people who are, I think a lot of these shooters are old enough that they could probably figure out the combination and their dad's safe anyway. So it's not. I don't.
So yeah, it would be kind of unfair to hold the dad liable if he did everything in his power to keep the guns held safely, but somebody still managed to get their hand on a gun.
Yeah, but I think a point that should be brought up, and I'm surprised I haven't brought it up earlier, is that when there is a gun in the house, the chances of you dying are exponentially greater than that gun saving your life. Just statistically speaking.
I mean, you could say that about just about anything in your house. If you
yeah,
have
but
a
the thing is guns don't.
a
gun
pool,
is the only thing in the house
you're
that is
statistically
meant
more likely to drown in
kill.
a pool than if you didn't have a pool.
It's true, but a pool's meant to swim. A gun is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
According to the intentions of the person who is currently holding the gun.
Okay, what is the gun supposed? Like, what is the gun for?
That depends on the person who's holding the gun at the time.
No, that's you're kind of pushing away the question. What is the gun for? Like, when you buy a gun, what is the intention of that gun being built?
To shoot bullets.
So you can.
I don't know. Depends. I mean,
kill. Like the thing is, it's killing. That's what it is.
Are there people who go to the Olympic Games and ski and shoot? Is the purpose of those guns to kill?
And the original intent for that gun was for hunting. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying like a gun is meant to kill. You're meant to destroy something.
What about a knife?
Cutting open something. I don't know. Cutting open something.
What do you think? What do you think the knife was invented for first? Killing something or being used as table utensils?
I can see a lot more practicality of a knife than I can a gun.
You can a gun, even though they were designed originally for the same purpose?
Yeah, no. I mean, look what you can do with a knife. You can cut open. You can cut
string and
you can shape.
And you can also kill somebody with it.
You can also kill someone. You can kill an animal with it. What's the purpose of a gun? Are you going to use a gun besides killing something? If you're left on an island besides killing something, are you going to use a gun to shoot random targets? That's not very beneficial.
I don't see how that's relevant. Just because something's doesn't have an explicitly beneficial use to society doesn't mean that it should be banned.
I'm not necessarily saying that, but I am saying a gun is meant to kill. That is essentially what it is for.
It can be used
yes, you
to
can use to shoot discs or play. And look, shooting guns fun. I've shot a gun before. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
but it's not like it's the purpose of it is to kill. Like that is the only purpose. Like when you're at the target range, you're practicing to kill in the worst case scenario, but that's what you're practicing for.
So you're taking this weapon and developing a skill that you can use in a very specific situation where you are potentially your own life is threatened. You don't think that has any value?
I mean that I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm saying that is the only value. Like that's what a gun is.
It's a pretty important value.
I'm going to ask another question to pull us out of the circle. So, what do you guys think should be done about the bump stocks in the wild, as well as the 100-round magazines, etc.? Is there a solution for the ones that are still already out there?
I would argue that banning bump stocks is ultimately a futile endeavor. I mean, go ahead and do it if you want. For the most part, they're not especially effective in like open combat. Like I wouldn't, like in the hypothetical situation where I needed to use a rifle for self-defense, I wouldn't arm it with a bump stock. But the problem with bump stocks is that it's effectively just a spring and a piece of molded plastic, and people are already 3D printing entire guns. Like, you're not going to stop somebody from getting a bump stock if they want a bump stock, but go ahead and
let's talk about 3D printing.
Oh boy.
You guys have thoughts on that?
I mean, you can't really do anything about it at this point. I mean, someone has a computer, someone has a 3D printer, they can print the gun.
I mean, unless you want to let the government force people to license their 3D printers with the government and like report everything, let the government like keep tabs on everything that they're 3D printing. I'm opposed to letting the government infringe on somebody's privacy to that extent, personally.
I mean, at this point, unless like you regulate the internet, there's really no way to stop someone from 3D printing a gun. I mean, it's just for practicality reasons. I mean, with the bump stock, look, the bump stock is just, it was a distraction. The only reason why people are talking about it was because it was the first time I'd ever heard of one, like during the Las Vegas shooting. Mm-hmm. And it's just, you're putting a Band-Aid on a wound. Like you're not doing anything with it. Should they be illegal? Probably, but
pretty ineffective and pointless in my. Yeah.
Vaughn, I do actually have a question though. Like, I understand automatic weapons are illegal, but do you support?
They're not illegal, but they're very difficult to get.
Do you support automatic weapons being more out there, and why? Like, what's the point of it?
I feel like currently the standard necessary to obtain automatic weapons is acceptable. I have to look a little bit deeper into it, but I feel that the only way to obtain an automatic weapon is if you need a Class 3 firearms license, and I think the only way to obtain that is if you own a firearms dealership, and one or two other instances. I feel like that should be expanded a little bit so that regular civilians should be able to obtain an automatic weapon, but only if they meet very stringent background checks. And like currently, the only way for even the people who can obtain a Class 3 license to get an automatic weapon is to go through like a year's worth of investigation through the FBI, and I feel like that's a pretty fair compromise for the most part.
There's also one other point I do want to bring up is, and I kind of touched on this before when we were talking about, having armed guards at school, but I have a problem, shockingly, I know, of the argument that, like, if only that person had a gun, they would have stopped the situation. And I kind of have real problems with that because I don't think that, unless you served in the army, unless you're like a police officer, unless you went through rigorous training, and I don't think the majority of the people who own guns, there is no training that can prepare you for someone shooting back. Because like when you see people shooting, you see them shooting at a non-moving target, or if it's moving back and forth. Like it's not shooting back at you, and I think there's this adrenaline rush that will affect your aim, will affect your like you can't really prepare for that.
You can actually. There's actually, I'm going to get kind of into nitty gritty here, and I hope I don't bore anybody. Most people when they fire guns irregularly, they have an issue even landing their shots on target because they're so afraid of the gunfire from their own gun that they flinch and they move their gun down or up or to the side or something like that when they pull the trigger because they're anticipating the explosion. In a lot of instances where somebody is unfamiliar with gunfire, then yeah, sure, getting shot at is going to freak them out. But there's an entire techniques of gun training specifically designed to train you to not flinch or even blink when you fire a weapon. And so if you're doing that on a regular basis, if you're training with your weapon on a regular basis, gunfire doesn't freak you out any more than, I don't know, a revving car does or anything similar to that.
So you're saying
there are ways to mitigate
so you're saying
fear of gunfire.
So you're saying if I shoot back at you, your reaction is going to be just the same?
If you train enough, yeah. You can hear a bullet go past in some instances, but it's not. Like, the scariest part of a gunfire is the explosion coming from the barrel. And if you train yourself and fire your weapon on a regular basis, you can very easily become accustomed to that.
So, Milwaukee, Wisconsin in general had laxer gun laws. And the officer in Milwaukee, the sheriff in Milwaukee, lieutenant, whatever, the head cop there. I'm sorry, I forgot who it was, but he made a point saying, like, these laxer laws have only made Milwaukee less safe. and he backed it up with the data. And you can look at the 3 top states with the most gun deaths versus the 3 top states with the least amount of gun deaths, and you can see where. Let me read them to you. Here are the 3 top states with the most gun deaths. Louisiana, per 100,000. Louisiana, Alabama, Alaska. Now here's the least gun deaths. Hawaii, Maine, Massachusetts. What's the difference between those?
Let me ask you something. Do they happen to control for suicide in those statistics?
Do they control for suicides? I'm sure they do. So
You're sure?
I'm sure they do. But again, yeah, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they can. I'm saying no. I'm saying no. What I'm saying is I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt here. I'm sure suicides have to make up those statistics. But again, as we talked about earlier, I don't think suicide should be necessarily a deterrent when looking at the gun control debate.
I think you can't, when you're discussing issues of gun legislation and which gun legislation you're going to implement, you can't conflate suicide with homicide. Because again, you can commit suicide with a flintlock pistol, which has 1 shot. So, and if the majority of gun deaths in a state come from suicide, which is the case in many of these rural areas, they have very low homicide rates and very high suicide rates. How is banning AR-15s with more than 10 rounds going to prevent them from committing suicide?
You're right. It doesn't, but I don't. So Hawaii is a very probably
island.
Yeah. No, but the thing is, it's like, okay, but the obvious, fine, take suicides into account, but the obvious difference between states with more gun deaths versus states with fewer gun deaths is, gun restrictions. And even if that saves even that changes the amount of people dying, that's a success.
I think
I'm not
in many instances where if we implemented gun laws that the Democrats wanted to employ, the rate of gun death in places like Arkansas or Iowa or many of these rural states would not change at all because the majority of their gun deaths are suicide. And they would still have the highest gun death rate generally across the nation because you're including suicides.
Wait, why wouldn't you expect to see gun deaths go down? I'm just curious.
Because if only one person gets murdered with a gun in a year and 30 people commit suicide with a gun, how is passing legislation that is designed to target murder going to reduce the gun rate in a state where most of the gun death is suicide?
I'm not saying it's going to stop murder, but it might stop. I'm not saying the Democrats have the answer. I'm just saying, maybe making it tougher to get guns will detract from the suicides.
Maybe.
Which is a point I don't think should be thrown away. I don't. I know that. I know.
Do you think most people in places like Iowa and Arkansas can't get their hands on the gun unless they go through a gun store? They have to wait a month.
Let's take the NRA's biggest argument. What about Chicago? Strictest gun laws. Yeah. Well, they're 34th in terms of in that ranking. 34th, so it's in the middle. But where do people think they get their guns illegally, which they do? They actually buy them legally, not from Mexico, but from neighboring states like Indiana, where it's so much easier to buy a gun. And those are used for homicides.
Well, first off, the majority of guns used in homicides are obtained illegally, not legally. Something like
But they are originally bought legally from neighboring states through the private sales loophole.
Okay, well, it's not a private sales loophole. And second of all, it's illegal for somebody from a neighboring state to sell a firearm to somebody from out of state. So they're already breaking the law.
Okay, but that doesn't that's irrelevant.
You see how they're not able to regulate that? See how the problem comes in there?
Yeah, but if you're able to track that gun back to that gun seller who originally sold that gun through private sales, don't you think you can probably not completely get rid of crime, but reduce it by a significant amount? Because everyone's saying it's Mexico. No, it's not Mexico. They buy the guns initially legally and then they sell it illegally.
If I grant you that, why do neighboring states not have the same rate of gun deaths as some place like Chicago?
Economics. Basically, that's what it comes down
Economics.
to. Economics.
Okay, so we just touched on something here. So the kinds of guns that both of these two places have are similar. They both have the same kinds of guns. But one place has a very extremely high gun homicide rate, and the other place does not have that same homicide rate.
It's
But the guns are the
economics.
same.
If you really
So
wanna,
maybe we
if
should
you really
maybe
wanna-
we should solve the economic problem, and you would reduce the gun homicide rate in the place that has the economic problem without infringing on anybody's civil liberties.
Well, then it comes right back to something that we both agree on. We have to end the war on drugs. Like, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, sure.
It's people getting arrested, put in jail, getting out of jail, not being able to find a job, so they go back to drugs. It's an economic. It's a whole different debate right here. Where gangs come from, where inner city comes from. It's, I just,
You don't actually have to. You don't have to start pushing a bunch of gun legislation if it's clearly not the gun that is the primary issue that is pushing forward the crime.
No, because you're basically saying that guns are not the problem, and yeah,
I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying they're not a variable.
They're a pretty big variable there, though.
Yeah, it's true.
It's like
a
it's
gun,
like if you
and a gun crime is an important variable. But if two people have the same gun and one person goes and commits a crime with it, and the other person lives his entire life without committing a crime with that gun, is it the gun that's the issue, or is it the person and his lifestyle that's the issue?
I mean, it's the economics involved, like I said before. We're gonna have to go back to like I said, it's a whole different debate.
Right, but you can reduce the rate of gun crime by tackling the underlying issues of that cause or convince somebody to commit the crime in the first place without infringing on the rest of the country's rights to own guns. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask one more question, and then I think I'm gonna open up to the listeners.
Yuck.
Do you guys?
Sorry, I'm kidding.
How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
I'm good.
Doing good.
Okay. Do you guys have opinions on the efficacy of gun-free zones?
I think they're pretty pointless, and I feel like it's been pretty obvious at this point that they're not an effective deterrent. I mean, it's just a sign. It's not gonna prevent anything.
There's actually
by all means, if you want to make your private place of business a gun-free zone, go ahead. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be allowed to do that. I'm just saying it's kind of pointless.
It's actually funny. There was a study that it didn't have to do with specific gun-free zones, but just like it looked into towns where, like guns were very prominent, and then they looked into towns where they weren't very prominent. I mean, like they were just like kind of middle of the road, and then it looked into towns that like had no guns whatsoever. Hyperbole there, and what they found was like violence didn't occur in the towns with a lot of guns, violence didn't occur in the towns with no guns, but violence did occur in the middle ground. I mean, that doesn't really help either of our debates, but I just thought it was a fascinating fact.
It's almost like there's no correlation with the amount of guns in a place and a crime. Or at least no strong correlation.
I don't know. I remember, I think it was after Sandy Hook, I remember some newspaper decided to publish like where all the gun owners lived. And I just thought it was the stupidest fucking thing in the world. Like, even as a liberal, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
The majority of gun owners tend to be rural.
Yeah, no, I as far as gun-free
some rural places have high gun death rates, some places have lower gun death rate. There's no real correlation.
In terms of gun-free zones, though, I mean, I think it's kind of stupid how... I don't even know if stupid. Sorry, that's kind of going off a different tangent here. But, I do feel that I don't necessarily feel safe when I see someone with a gun in public. I don't know that person, and I have to automatically assume that they're going to protect me. I mean, yeah, we see police officers, which it's a different debate in terms of protecting people, African Americans, but you do see that there's some trust there. Maybe not to a black person, but
I don't feel one way or the other if I see somebody with a gun on their hip.
Well, yeah,
It depends
but
on how the
you're
person looks.
but
or even
yeah.
a knife. Oftentimes, if I see someone with a gun on their hip, I'd say, "Hey, man, nice gun. What kind of gun is that?" And then we trade notes about what the best gun is.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's like I don't know that person though. It doesn't really make me feel any more comfortable. So
I mean, I don't know half the people I see with guns.
yeah, I know, but you're used to it. I mean, I'm not. I live in New York City. Do you know how stupid it would be for someone to like carry a gun in New York City? Not just because it's illegal, but because like, hey, look, someone's shooting, and then I'm gonna shoot back. I'm probably gonna hit someone because it's just so populated.
I think you're dramatically overestimating the tendency for somebody to pull the trigger on somebody.
Oh no, I'm
Especially
fully aware that. I'm just saying it's. Look, owning a gun is based on hypotheticals. Seeing someone with a gun is based on hypotheticals. So I don't know. I mean, like either way, I just like I don't necessarily feel like I feel kind of uncomfortable. Why does a person carrying a gun should feel more comfortable than me?
Should feel more what?
More comfortable than me. Like when you're making the argument, like I have a right to protect myself. Well, I also have a right to feel comfortable, and I don't necessarily know if you are going to do anything with your gun.
Wait. You have a right to feel comfortable? Where is that outlined?
No, I'm just saying, like if I'm in public. Wait, what do you mean outline?
Where in law is there?
I'm not talking about law,
right
but I'm talking about, I'm automatically, someone who has a gun automatically has more rights than someone who doesn't have a gun.
More rights? He doesn't have more rights. You can carry a gun too. You just choose
I know,
not to.
but I choose not to because I don't feel safe with it. There's a certain level.
That doesn't mean that person
I don't feel
has more
safe
rights
necessarily with someone with a gun too. Like it doesn't make me feel any better about myself.
Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're just because you don't feel more safe doesn't mean that you're not more safe.
It doesn't mean I am more safe too.
That's an internal. That's a phobia.
No, but it doesn't mean
if somebody has arachnophobia and they're afraid of spiders, does that mean they're less safe around spiders?
Yeah, but look how many people marched in the gun march. You know, it was over 1 million people in the United States.
March in what?
The gun rally march, the one that took place in D.C. and across the country. You know, those people feel the same way.
Protected by armed guards.
Were they protected by armed guards?
They were protected by armed guards.
I'm sure if someone wanted to shoot, they probably could have gotten away with it, and it would have taken a long time for them to...
But no one did.
No one did. Thank God.
So it's almost like this fear of guns is kind of pathologic.
And also, owning a gun is kind of pathologic, too. I mean, you're owning something in the sake... in I'm not saying the hopes, but, like, you know, the very unlikely hypothetical chance that there's a guy with a gun and you're gonna save the day. Like that's what it's based on.
Hang on. You're specifying a very specific instance where somebody else has a gun. People don't use guns to defend themselves from people with other guns. They use it to defend themselves from many instances of crime. But going back on, but yeah, you're correct. It is a pretty unlikely chance that you will need to use your gun to defend yourself. But I think many people would agree that nobody's planning on getting into a car crash. Is it pathologic to wear your seatbelt?
Sorry, repeat that question one more time.
Nobody is planning on getting into a car crash. So is it pathological to wear your seatbelt every time you get into your car?
I don't know. Have you ever been in the car with a woman there? Hey, no.
I have, but I don't only put my seatbelt on when I'm in the car with a female driver.
No,
I put it on every time.
But I mean, let's be honest though. Like, car accidents are very common, more so than guns, and more people die from car accidents than guns. So it's.
But the death toll is not substantial.
But at the same time, it's not just about protecting yourself from a car accident. I mean, you step on the brake, you move forward,
Yeah, but you don't need to put your seatbelt on if you're slowing down.
No, but the majority of the time, people, I think everyone, from the time they have their car to the time that, you know, they can no longer see, so the driver's license is taken away because of old age, you know, you're probably going to have a few car accidents in that time. Not many people are going to have incidences of being shot at.
Are you going to have a few car accidents? Is it a guarantee? What if you're a really good driver?
Hypothetically, well, yeah, but you also could be in a car with someone who's not a good driver.
Do you think you'll... I mean, what do you think the odds are of a crime being committed against you? Have you ever had a crime committed against you?
I've been punched before.
Oh, you've been assaulted?
Yeah, but my response was never... First of all, it wasn't like... Well, I was sucker punched, but my response was never going to be like, oh, you deserve to die now. Come on.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily saying that you need to... That's actually, it's actually a good instinct. I mean, I carry guns. I wouldn't pull out a gun just because somebody sucker punched me either. But you were the victim of a crime. So the odds of you being the victim of a crime are actually not insignificant. It's a possibility.
Yeah, but those crimes are like petty theft. Like I remember someone was trying to bamboozle me into, getting the scratches out of my car while I went shopping for $200, and I told him to go fuck himself. But I wasn't going to threaten him with a gun.
I mean, petty theft can actually escalate to life or death pretty quickly, as indicated by the Zimban case.
Well, then
where a person was just following a guy, and then he was assaulted, and presumably thought he was being beaten to death.
Okay, can we... One more thing, though, actually, and then we can get to the questions. But can we talk about the villainizing of the victims? And I think that's something that really irritates me. So you got the David Hoggs, which, fine, whatever, annoying little brat, but he's got a following. But then you got the Gabby Giffords, or, the Bill Bradleys. Wait.
I'm not familiar with Bill Bradley.
Is his name Bill Bradley, or am I just thinking of the Bradley Bill?
I'm not. That name doesn't sound familiar.
He was a Reagan cabinet member who got shot, and then he was paralyzed, and then he spent his life, looking at gun control, trying to make gun control legislation, and it's just everyone became a victim.
Chris Brady.
Wait, Brady. Yes, Chris Brady. Yeah, sorry, the Brady Bill. I was thinking Bill Brady.
Throw that to Chris Cowart. Called that.
Yeah, all right, good job, Chris. So yeah, that is. I think that's really gets my like. It wasn't long before the parents of the Sandy Hook children became, villainized by the NRA. Like.
By the NRA?
By the NRA, by Alex Jones, by...
Okay, I saw Alex Jones claim that it was a conspiracy. I never saw the NRA say anything about the Sandy Hook kids.
All right, I'm not going to say I'm correct because I don't have exactly the facts to back me up right now, but...
Okay.
With Gabby Giffords, for instance, they were villainizing her, and I'm very sure about.
Okay, they attack her because they disagree with her politically. Okay.
Yeah, but don't you see why she might want some gun legislation?
Yeah, I see. I can understand why she would want that, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have to agree with the legislation she proposes.
Yeah, but you don't have to portray her as a villain because of it. Like, also, these kids who were in a terrible argument that I just hate is that, okay, why don't, if you're so worried about school shootings, why don't, we just spend so much money on security? Like, you shouldn't have to go to a prison every day being a student. We should be spending money on the education because our education system is so terrible.
People are going to a prison if they go into, I don't know, a courthouse or a bank that has armed guards.
No, it's not even that. But the fact of the matter is if there's a bill passed to, put guards in every single school, that's money that could go towards education, paying the teachers more, investing in textbooks. Like, we're putting, I know this sounds very, like, this is a terrible way of me putting it, but we're putting the safety of our kids more so than what they're learning in schools. And I'm not saying we shouldn't worry about the safety of our kids, but the fact that we're even having this conversation in America is crazy.
I don't think it's any more crazy than putting armed guards anywhere else.
Say that one more time.
I don't see how it's any more crazy than putting armed guards anywhere else necessarily. I mean, what's wrong with a place spending money on security? I mean, there's I'm not positive, but I've heard stories about schools in the inner cities, and they have stuff like metal detectors at the entrances of their schools, and they have people patting kids down because there's gang violence in the community, and they don't want people bringing in knives and shivs and other stuff like that. Is that an absurd expense to make, considering the circumstances?
No, I understand that. I don't think a few cars is that much of a problem. But you do realize the next bill that's going to be passed is towards school safety is going to be more about protecting kids rather than teaching kids, which I just think is an insane thing to have that doesn't happen in other countries. They don't have these conversations because they don't have these kind of problems.
Yeah, but they have a lot of other problems.
They have a lot of what problems?
They have a lot of other problems.
I don't know, universal health care.
Being arrested for your opinions.
Yeah, one guy.
Not one guy. Many people.
All right.
So in terms of getting stuff from the listeners, for the sake of organization, if you're listening and you have something you want to say or to ask or to bring up, just post it in the general text chat, and then just don't have to post it, but you can just give me a shout out, and then I'll call out your name to say what you want to say, just so that we can keep it orderly. To kick us off, it sounds like Christopher has something, so if you can feel free to unmute yourself, Christopher, and then we'll see what Eric and Vaughn have to say about it.
Real quick before he goes, Eric, what do you think about Trump's response to, say, terrorism in the U.S.? Stuff like the Muslim ban. What do you think about that?
Trump's response to terrorism in the U.S.? The Muslim ban?
Yeah, like some people think that Muslims should be banned from certain countries because they want to prevent terrorism. And other proposals to prevent terrorism. Do you think it's overblown?
It's stupid because, where did the 9/11 terrorists come from but Saudi Arabia, and they're not on the list. I think it gives people a false sense of security. When was the last time we had a terrorist attack that was 9/11? I think there was one other terrorist attack, and there's a few smaller ones, but we had...
They contributed to shootings a couple times, or mass shooting. Record.
Yeah, our entire world changed after September 11th when 2,500 people died, and we've done nothing about guns. It's like, killing is okay as long as it's made in the USA.
Well, it's okay as long as there's a justified reason to do it. But I presume you think that Trump's Muslim ban and other proposals like that, preventing Muslims from entering the country to some degree with the ostensible purpose of preventing terrorism, is kind of an absurd reaction. Right?
Oh, yeah. It's absurd.
Okay, well, mass shootings and the like happen on about a similar rate to terrorism.
Much less rate. You're more likely to get struck by lightning than... I don't know about the gun statistic, but...
You're more likely to get struck by lightning, attacked by a shark, than shot by a gun.
But wait. No, but when was... how many terrorist attacks have we had in the past 11, 12 years?
There was the Orlando shooting, which I'm sure
yes, that's...
shooting.
Okay, one terrorist attack.
San Bernardino.
San Bernardino. Sorry, this is so many right now. San Bernardino, what was that one?
When the two Muslim terrorists ran through California, shooting people up. That was
that's right. Sorry. So 3. Okay. Boston bombing. 3 people died. 4. All right. So 4 terrorist attacks.
So it does happen.
Oh, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I just like but statistically speaking, it's just like, okay, 4 terrorist attack happens. Now all of a sudden you're gonna tell people that every Muslim is a terror. Like, look, there are people in CLS and CLC, for that matter, who think that we should do something about every Muslim. Like, they say, like, oh, I don't want to live under Sharia law. They don't fucking understand what Sharia law is. They think everyone interprets religion the same, and that I had a friend that we actually had to console the day after Trump won because he is Pakistani, and
I think that's absurd.
No.
But look, the point I was getting at is, I will agree with you that terrorism is an extremely small issue in the United States statistically. So I think it's absurd to pass sweeping legislation to try and prevent terrorism. I think it's unnecessary. But statistically speaking, mass executions with guns is also statistically irrelevant. And so I would argue that an overreaction of extreme legislation to prevent something that is statistically irrelevant is just as unnecessary as massive legislation to prevent terrorism.
Well, yeah, maybe mass shootings, but gun deaths in general, it's not that rare.
But people don't argue about gun deaths; they argue about mass shootings. That's the
one time where because
push.
The thing is like we're used to people dying by guns, and then every few months we'll have this mass shooting. Mass shootings are a lot more common than terrorist attacks in the United States.
They're common if you include gang violence and murder-suicide inside people's homes.
The past 4 shootings have killed 111 people, mass shootings.
So
by 4 people.
Shootings and 111 people dead out of 300 million. Do you think that's statistically significant?
Well, that's still a shit ton more than in other countries. That's all I have to say. Like that's statistically speaking, that's nothing. But to say that someone had a shoe, like I said before, someone had a bomb in their shoe, and we cannot go through security at the airports without taking off our shoes.
Do you think that's a good idea? I think that's dumb.
Oh, of course it's dumb, and I think we can all agree that it's dumb. But at the same time,
we shouldn't do things just because something happened.
No, but this happens
a reaction
time.
Is not necessarily equivalent to the probability of something happening.
I'm not going to get shot by a gun tomorrow, knock on wood. I know that. I probably will not die by getting shot by a gun. Maybe someone in this podcast wants to prove my point wrong, but
not me.
I understand, statistically speaking, it's not going to happen. However, statistically speaking, I'm more likely to get killed by a responsible gun owner than I am by a terrorist. And I live in New York City, where terrorism is a real threat. I mean, I don't know if you guys...
Statistically speaking, you're more likely to die of secondhand smoke than gunfire.
I mean,
are you aware that like 30,000 people a year die because of lung cancer caused by secondhand smoke?
Trust me, I would love to do so. I would love to ban cigarettes, but I don't think that's this isn't a cigarette debate. This is a gun control debate.
I think it's ultimately a control debate, not even necessarily guns. Control and freedom.
What if it's a smoking gun?
Oh,
God damn it!
All right, Christopher, are you ready to jump in?
Christopher. His mic's on me. Oh, never mind.
What? Are you guys talking to me or Riley?
No, but if you want to jump in, I'm sure Christopher won't mind.
I was talking to Christopher Solera. Did you have something you want to jump in with, Cowart?
No, I just heard Chris. What do you guys think about selective media sensationalism?
Oh God, that's a
I think it's really I think it's really destructive and clearly driven by profit margins.
Oh shit, I'm stupid. All right. So my question is, what do y'all think about the threshold theory? So there was this article from New Yorker that posted in the link posted in the main chat. It was written back in 2015 but resurfaced, and it was about the idea that we are still social creatures. We still follow swarm theory. We follow the lead in most given situations. It's instinctual. So my question is, what do you think about this hypothesis that the reason why there seems more prevalence of mass shootings at increasing rate as we go through our lives is that the threshold for school shootings has been surpassed, just like a riot. So in a riot, if one guy throws a rock, doesn't mean that everyone's going to throw a rock. It means the guy next to him might throw a rock, and they might be joined by a third, a fourth, a fifth. So again, it's just a hypothesis. But what do y'all think about this?
Especially like the copycat idea.
I don't necessarily believe that. I'm sure. I'm not saying there's people who don't copy that model.
I haven't seen really enough evidence one way or the other to have a concrete opinion on it. I mean, my first instinct is, even if it is true, it's still such a statistically insignificant scenario that I don't think any legislation should be passed to, like, I don't know, ban people from talking about school shooters, which is what people claim is the cause of copycat shooters, that they seek the fame.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't think that anything should be done about that.
just one other point I kind of want to. I guess this is still on topic, but like that whole taboo about like someone like Phil DeFranco, who I actually really enjoy, but like how like after shooting, like he doesn't want to say the guy's name or show his picture. I don't really see that as a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah,
like showing
if
like
somebody
a picture
wants to
or
personally do that,
yeah, and
somebody
and
personally
it's,
choose not to say their name, I have nothing against that. I just
yeah, like first of all,
question how effective that would really be. Really,
yeah, first of all, that person's not going to probably see their name posted. They're either dead or in jail. And secondly,
somebody
I
else
do
might
think it's
see it.
also
I think they
important to kind of realize where this person's coming from. I'm not saying there's justification to why he did it, but like, you know, maybe we can learn into his psyche, and you know, you can't really look into that or have that discussion without knowing his name and where he grew up, where he came from. So I think that's actually, you know, very important to do. And goes.
the only issue is so much that the shooter that the news is talking about at the moment is seeing it, but that somebody else who wants attention sees the level of attention that the shooter's getting, and then they're like, "Oh, I want to do that because then people talk about me." And if they're depressed or something and have nothing to live for, then well, why not?
Yeah,
I think that's the theory.
yeah.
But again, I
think
don't
it's a
anything
stupid
should be
theory, but
done about that.
I really like Phil DeFranco. I just like completely hate when he does that. It's kind of cringeworthy to me. Okay.
We're gonna let Cody jump in then.
All right. So would you guys agree that gun violence has increased in the last 50 years?
I mean, the percentage of both, at least I just looking at the murder statistics today, and they have gone up a few thousand
But
murders in the past about 5 years.
in actually
But
fairness,
overall,
in fairness, it's
historically
gone
low.
down too. I mean, I think 2016 was like the lowest rate in a while.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's at an all-time low currently. Now, our weapons have not changed. I mean, specifically the AR platform has been around since the Vietnam era.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if it's not the weapons, what do you think is the cause for the increase in gun violence?
The cause of it. So, wait, the cause of increase?
Within the past 5 years,
Yeah.
gun murders have been going up by a small percentage.
You know, what do you think? Why do you think we're seeing more gun violence now, and the targetization of these weapons by the media, even though these weapons have been around for 60 years?
So I can actually answer that. I think it's the amount of guns that are available. I mean, take a look at when Obama became president, gun sales skyrocketed. The greatest joke is like the biggest seller for gun manufacturers is a Democratic president.
Mm-hmm.
And when there's more guns, then there's more gun deaths, whether it's suicides or gun violence. Go on. Sorry.
But gun sales have been increasing continuously for decades and decades, even through previous presidents.
Yeah. So gun sales.
So gun sales have been going up as gun violence has been going down.
Exactly. So they contradict each other. So what is the cause of seeing all this now?
I honestly don't have an answer to that, and that's why I want to, like I said in the very beginning, like have funding to the CDC to investigate this, like what causes gun violence to go up and down, and I don't know, like, but yeah, I don't have the answer to that. The funny thing is, it's like what I was saying before is that guns this whole gun debate is fairly new in the grand scheme of things. There's only been 2 or 3 Supreme Court cases that have dealt with guns, and it wasn't until like the 1970s when the NRA, which was started as like a very responsible gun organization, was kind of taken over, that the marketing of guns and kind of and you're gonna disagree with this, I understand, Vaughn, but like they kind of changed what this like Second Amendment was. Like an interpretation of the Second Amendment 200 years before is different than it is now.
What was the interpretation 200 years before?
I mean, the thing was, the president in court cases, in the Supreme Court cases, were very like, if there was an anti-gun ruling, there wasn't mass protests. And, I think it would, here's a quote from, in the 1969s, the strictest gun legislation was in California by Ronald Reagan. And yet he's the first president to run with the NRA backing in 1980. So
we have to see what legislation he was supporting.
No, it was the strictest gun legislation that had ever been presented to a state. And it was mostly in response to actually the Black Panther movement, because the Black Panther movement, you probably would really want to thank the Black Panthers because they really got the whole gun debate going.
The thing is that NRA isn't against gun legislation as long as it's sensible.
No, but they are. The one give I've ever seen the NRA give is the bump stock. That was the only thing I've ever seen them say, like, okay, well, we'll give you this, and then, just say that's enough for now.
What about all of the legislation before this year?
I think it was not really till the 1980s. I mean,
have they contested that the NFA Act of 1930s or whatever should be overturned because it's unconstitutional?
Yeah, but the NRA... Yeah, that was before the NRA. The NRA in the 1930s is a lot different than the NRA now.
Yeah, they've had enough. There's nowhere left to go.
There was a coup. No, there was a coup. I think it was the 1970s at an NRA convention where they basically kicked out all the hunter, the NRA people who were all for the hunting, all for guns only for hunting, to what it is today. They were literally all about.
So they changed their mind. So they changed their mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You should read into the NRA history. They're a very different organization than what they used to be.
Okay, just because I agree with what they say today doesn't mean I have to agree with what they did 30 years prior.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying after a few people got a hold and became ahead of the NRA in a coup, yes, it was a coup within the NRA, the marketing of the Second Amendment has changed dramatically.
Just because an advocacy group today was marketing things one way and then changed it doesn't mean that the intention of the Second Amendment as written by George Washington and his peers changed.
There's really not much that the Founding Fathers have written about personal gun ownership. They write a lot about militias, but there's not a lot written about personal gun ownership. Even take...
Yeah, that's because everybody owned a gun just because they needed one to survive.
Yeah, but
nobody imagined a world where people wouldn't have a gun. That was the status quo. Everybody had a gun.
Unless you were Black or Native American, which there were laws specifically geared towards making sure that demographic of people didn't own guns for obvious reasons.
Yeah, that's true. And I disagree with that. They weren't considered citizens at the time, which meant that the Bill of Rights didn't apply to them, but that was stupid.
Oh, so the Founding Fathers aren't so infallible.
It was the NRA who actually defended Black people's rights to own guns for a while, up until that one instance with the Black Panthers.
Wait, say that one more time?
Sorry, I got to jump in right here. I got to say this real quick. You said that the Constitution and stuff doesn't outline anything about individual gun ownership and stuff, but it very clearly states that the right of the individual to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I mean, all it takes is that one sentence. They don't need to elaborate on that anymore. They've said it right there.
Well, it says the right of the people, but I mean, ostensibly, the Bill of Rights is directed at the individual peoples of the United States. I mean, there is no. If you take a look at, I don't know, the First Amendment, it's not the right of this news organization has the right to free speech. It's everybody has the right to free speech. I mean, the Bill of Rights is about the people, not organizations.
Actually, the interesting thing is the not to get on a free speech debate, but freedom of religion is actually I'm not saying it's a fairly new concept, but they were allowed to discriminate up until the 1930s or 1940s was a massive Supreme Court decision that really, which weirdly enough had to do with Jehovah's Witnesses. And
then they acknowledged that was unconstitutional, right?
Exactly. Can we agree that the Second Amendment is not a very well written sentence for that matter.
No, I think it's very well written.
I think it's very. I don't think it's well. I think it's open for interpretation, and I think that's actually most English people, most English scholars would say it's a terribly written sentence, regardless if you agree with it or not. It's a terribly written sentence. There's a lot of extra commas that shouldn't be there, grammatically speaking, and I think it's very ambiguous for. I don't know. That's the reason why we're having a conversation right now on it. It's because
I don't think it's ambiguous at all.
Well, that's because but the thing is, you're interpreting it as an individual's right, while I'm interpreting it as a militia's right. So that's not clear. I mean, that's
it's very clear. Like the militia statement is a justification for the actual right, which is to keep it for the people to keep and bear arms. They were explaining why they were putting that right in there. Because we need a militia, because you need a militia to defend the country.
Yeah. It says, because a militia is necessary, the right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed.
Well, that's because we didn't have an army at the time. Do we have an army now?
Well, actually, they did contemplate the possibility of there being a standing army, although at least some of the founders' suggestions was that it should never be more than like 500,000 strong. So that way, the entirety of the populace of the U.S. would vastly outnumber a potential military coup.
And weirdly enough, we now have the strongest military in the world.
Yeah, I don't think that's a justification to get rid of the Second Amendment. I think that's a problem.
I know, but I think it now has to be reinterpreted. Okay. So... any other questions? No, I'm not speaking. Sorry. Silverbackish just says, why does Eric speak of having the strongest military so badly? I am not saying having the strongest military isn't bad. I am saying that
the collective should be trusted more than the individual.
Brian, mute Chris Coward. No, I'm kidding, Chris. No, I am saying that. The reason why the Second Amendment was written at that time is we didn't have an army, and according to both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, two groups that don't agree with each other, that having they didn't want a really strong centralized army. That has changed. We now do have a strong centralized army. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying we might be overdoing it in how much we spend, and I think that's something we can maybe agree on. That our military...
The point of the militia is to allow the people of the United States to defend themselves from any authoritarian regime, foreign or domestic. That is the point of the militia.
All right, Chris, what is your question?
Well, first, this was an awesome debate. You guys are doing really good so far. And Eric, you've made me proud, babe. You hit the nail on the head with economics.
Oh, thank you.
Specifically. But as far as interpretation, when it comes to the military, there's direct keys, and those cannot be interpreted whatsoever. There is shall in there. They mention the word shall specifically, and that isn't trivial. You're supposed to follow that like to the letter.
No, but
how come? How come we're trusting multiple interpretations?
So let me say this, because that's a fairly good point. That I'm not saying you have a good point, but I understand where you're going from. I'm not saying you have a bad point either, but even Antonin Scalia in Heller versus DC, which is the most recent Supreme Court decision we can point to in terms of the gun debate, people saw this as like a big win for gun rights activists, which it was. Essentially, it was a big win. It was, and it was a win I actually agreed with in some sense, and I could get the facts of the facts of the case a little bit wrong, but essentially what it allowed was someone was allowed to own a handgun in his private home. I am 100% fine with that. What people are not really mentioning when they bring up that debate is Antonin Scalia's opinion on it. And it's a lot more restrictive than people realize. It says, yeah, you're allowed to own a handgun within the confines of your home, but that doesn't mean that states aren't allowed to create their own laws about, open carry or what kind of guns you're allowed to own. Like that's Antonin Scalia. He's not known for being a liberal by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, well, he actually states and communities are allowed to make restrictions on what kind of guns you can own within the confines of the Constitution.
But the thing is,
ignore the Constitution.
The Constitution doesn't tell us what guns to own. You're just assuming that guns, if it does tell us what guns we can own, and that's left up to the states. That's the point of the Constitution, is that whether the Constitution says it or not, the interpretation is left up to the states. Sorry, the laws that are not addressed in the Constitution are left up to the states.
For time, I think I'm going to close off the official debate recording after Sergio says his thing. And then if you all want to just fight with each other at the end.
If it should be up to the states, then a federal gun ban shouldn't fucking matter then, right?
I've never argued once for a federal gun ban.
Well, Eric should know that it works like two different ways, where the state can never supersede the Fed. But the state can legislate the Fed if all the states wanted to get together and do that.
I think it was the 14th Amendment that made it so this... I don't know. That's a completely different argument. So how about, Brian, to take over your hosting duties, how about we have one more question and then Vaughn and I can have our final say and then we can end it.
Okay. Sergio, what you got?
So, I read a news article today that the United States Geological Survey has put out a tweet banning citizens from roasting marshmallows over the lava flow in Hawaii. Do you believe this is a gross overstep of personal freedoms to burn to a crisp in lava by the federal government? And if the federal government is so willing to step on our rights to burn to a crisp while roasting marshmallows, do you think they will be willing to step into our rights to shoot bullets at the lava flow to defend our homes?
Now that's a hot take.
I guess this is the one chance where the government is overstepping their bounds and we should revolt with guns. I think the government should protect us from our stupidity sometimes. I mean, I think... I don't know to what extent, though. I
think that lava is clearly violating the NAP agreement, and you should open up on that motherfucker.
Yeah. No, but you shoot a gun, there's spray back, it'll get on your clothes, it'll burn you to death. I mean, I can't. It's not safe, guys. Come on.
Okay, final thoughts without rebuttals.
You go first.
You're fucking wrong, dude. I'm gonna tell you. fucking wrong about everything.
Ouch.
I think the Second Amendment pretty clearly outlines that the reason that the U.S. populace needs to be able to keep guns is so they can defend themselves from a tyrannical government, whether that's our own tyrannical government or a foreign tyrannical government. There's no way, even as large as our military is, that they would be able to defend the entirety of the continental United States. They obviously can't protect individual civilians from individual cases of violence in everyday life. And I think that U.S. civilians should be able to employ whatever firearms they deem necessary within reason to defend themselves.
Eric?
How do I not respond with "you're wrong too"?
Yeah, you can't copy me. Gotta come with something original.
Yeah, no. I don't have the solution. Like I said before, I think that we obviously have a problem in the United States, and it's completely clear when you compare ourselves to other first world countries. You can compare us to the shithole countries. Yes, I'm saying that. I'm being Trump saying shithole countries, but I want to be better than that as an America, and I don't know what that entails. And I think you do kind of have to look at the Second Amendment as, when it was written, what the purpose of it was for, and kind of the history from there to here, and then see that, look, we might be overstepping our interpretation of this. I mean, people like guns, and I think that's the best argument you can come up with, because everything else is just a hypothetical situation. And yeah, I have fun shooting guns too, but it's not something I'm necessarily going to die for in terms of protecting that freedom, because it's an inanimate object, and it's sure people kill people, but a gun makes it a hell of a lot easier to do that. So look, I don't have the solution. I don't know why or what to do, but something has to be done. And I think sugarcoating it with stupid arguments like it's a mental health problem is just not healthy.
Cool. All right. I'm glad everybody showed up. We had a good turnout. Thank you guys for being way more civil than Red Pill Black and Blair White.
guys.
maybe we can have some more of these in the future if anybody's up for it. But I thought it went pretty well. So I guess that's all we have for tonight.
All right. Awesome.